All right, now let's get a reaction from Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprises. Good morning, sir. Great to have you.
Good morning, Ladi.
Yeah, so debt to GDP ratio under the review period is at 22.5%. Is it time to worry?
Of course, it's time to worry. Because when we have these conversations, it's not so much about the debt to GDP ratio. Because you don't pay debt, you don't service debt with GDP. You service debt with revenue. And I think we must acknowledge that when we apply the debt to revenue ratio, the debt profile is clearly not sustainable. I mean, as at November last year, according to the Honorable Minister, debt service to revenue was 76%. And maybe by the end of the year, it had even deteriorated further. And the amount of money, the actual debt service, was 4.2 trillion. How much did we spend on capital? Even though the DMO is giving us a slightly different figure of about 3 trillion. But when you look at the size of resources that we are committing to debt service, it's really worrisome. Now the fiscal deficit is already about 6.4 trillion in the 2022 budget. Now the president has transmitted a supplementary budget or supplementary proposal of 2.55 trillion. By the time you add that to 6.4 trillion, you are getting close to 9 trillion in deficit. So that means we will need to borrow more. It has become a vicious circle. And this is a very worrisome situation because the total revenue outlay in the budget is 10.7 trillion. So when you already have a deficit of almost 10 trillion, and it's likely to go up harder, it's likely to go up higher because now oil price is over $100. That means the amount of budget we need for the subsidy is even going to exceed the 3 trillion. So at the end of the day, by the time you service debt and you pay subsidy, you have practically exhausted the entire revenue. So how are we going to sustain the system? Are we now going to be borrowing for overhead, for personnel, and for capital budget? So it's really a very disturbing scenario, and I think we need to go back to the drawing board and see what we can do, both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side. Because there's so much talk about revenue, nobody's talking about how to cut expenditure. I don't agree that there's nothing we can do about expenditure. We need to cut down expenditure so that we don't fall into a debt trap. Because if the borrowing increases, a lot of fall back to the CBN to be financing these things, the situation becomes even more inflationary. The amount of interest that was paid on CBN debt as at November last year was 1.1 trillion. That is significant. The full picture of the indebtedness to CBN was not full, but it's not less than 10 trillion. By the time you add the indebted to CBN, you add the AMCON debt, right now, the total debt will be getting close to 55 trillion, which is far higher than what we are even being told now. So it's really the macroeconomic outlook. It's not looking good at all.
All right, Dr. Muda, but very briefly now, what do you think can be done, at this time, realistically, to, bring down this debt stock?
Well, there's very little because we are already committed to a lot of things. Things that need to be done, we have to take some time to crystallize. For instance, we have been talking about some critical reforms in the oil and gas sector, because again, part of the reasons we are in this mess is because of the shape of our oil and gas sector. That sector is putting a lot of pressure on the finances of government. It's putting a lot of pressure on our foreign reserves because we have mismanaged that sector. So we need to accelerate reforms in the oil and gas sector. First, to be able to get more revenue, to address the issues of policy, issues of regulation around the PIA and how we can activate it. Secondly, to address the issue of insecurity. Now many oil producing countries are smiling because they are reaping a lot of windfall from the current crisis. But we are here lamenting, which is a paradox as an oil-producing country. Secondly, we need to accelerate reforms to be able to refine locally. The pressure of importation of petroleum products on our finances, on our foreign exchange is too much, it's excessive. So we need reforms to also make that happen. Then we need to deal with the issue of even the cost of the debt. Commercial debts are very expensive. I'm talking about this Eurobond. They are very expensive. And it contributes a lot to the escalation of the burden of debt. We should be looking more in the direction of concessionary debts. So these are some of the, and of course we need to look at our expenditure. Cost of governance. I mean, we are not even addressing that. Because if we continue this way, the macroeconomic situation will continue to get worse. The inflation situation will continue to get worse. The exchange rate depreciation will continue to get worse. Because when you struggle to finance this kind of growing deficits, it creates a lot of dislocations in the macroeconomic environment.
All right, Dr.
Those are
Muda.
some of the things that we need to do.
Okay. All right, Dr. Muda, and obviously borrowing, is getting more expensive with the Fed actually raising rates at this point. All right, Dr. Muda, thank you so much for coming on the show. CEO, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprises. Always great to have you on the program.
Thank you.